Okay, welcome back. Hello, everybody. Let's get started. All right. So how was practice lab 2? Did anybody start already?
Yeah.
Yeah? How is it? Okay.
That one took 2.5 hours. I was not expecting it. When you said it was going to be short.
It is short. This is super.
Your alarm went off at the beginning. We all like really dumb. And then I replayed it and I forgot it was there, so I was scared twice.
You were scared of my alarm? Come on. This melodic sound is like, this is how I wake up in the mornings. You gotta be alerted.
I can't hear alarm sounds during the day.
No?
Yeah, that's my morning alarm. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, no, but practice lab 2 is an important lab. So this is good. So I hope you get a handle on it. If any problems posted on the discussion board, I didn't attend to yet. So always kind of follow up. If I don't respond to anything on the discussion board, please follow up with me. I try to be responsive, but sometimes I miss stuff. That's an increasing problem. Good. So we are on module 14. Practice lab 2 is due on 11/14. That's end of this week. We're gonna do today. We're talking about single sample t-test. As you may imagine, a very important topic and a really fun topic actually, because now we're moving away from populations. We don't need the standard deviation anymore from the population. So now it's getting exciting because now we're actually going into sample statistics. So practice lab 3 is going to be coming out on 22nd. I'm going to push the due date a little back because of Thanksgiving. I guess you're all going to go home to some extent. Yeah.
Do you have class on that Wednesday?
Yeah, why not? No? We don't?
Can we do Zoom? Yeah, can we just Zoom that way? It's like, we can go home.
Yeah, good point actually. So when are you leaving in January? You're probably leaving the day before, you're leaving the day off?
Wednesday. People start leaving Monday,
I see. Okay, good. Okay, let me look into this. Yes, it makes sense to kind of do the Wednesday, either remote or we're gonna push the whole thing back. Let's see. Let me look into it. I'll get back to you.
How was your race? How was your race?
It went well. I did under 4 hours. I'm very proud.
That's really fast.
Well, it was.
How are you feeling now?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to my next long run on Saturday.
When's your next one?
My next, I do a half marathon in Sedona in February. Then I do a half marathon in Brooklyn and then a marathon in Berlin next year in September. So.
Do you have to win a lottery to get into the New York Marathon?
No, it was a fundraiser.
Oh,
okay. I fundraised. No, I was a fundraiser for the National Kidney Foundation because of the research in chronic kidney disease and yeah. It was hell of an experience. Like, I don't know who of you is a runner, like New York City Marathon, like it's the best. It was really a great experience. Absolutely.
First time doing it?
It was my first marathon, yeah. I did.
Marathon ever?
Yep.
And you did it under 4 hours? Wow.
Yep.
How long do you do the club? How long do you do it?
I trained 4 months. I trained 4 months every day running and yeah, 60 miles a week.
How much do you run every day?
Yep. Well, the minimum is the minimum of 4 miles a day.
A day? And
but I'm running 4 miles a day since 5 years, 6 years now.
How many How many are in the full marathon? 20?
33,000.
20?
33.
30?
33,000 then.
Miles?
No, the whole marathon. No, 33,000 ran the marathon. And the distance is 26.2 miles. Yeah. So it's the distance from a marathon in Greece to essence.
Oh yeah, 26.2, right?
26.2.
But there was a runner that had to run something back, right?
So the story is that the Battle of Marathon was the Athenians defended Athens against Sparta, who meant to invade the city. And the Athenians actually had a smaller army, but they defeated the Spartans. And full of joy, one soldier was tasked to run back to Athens to announce the good news on the marketplace. He ran back with armor and all his gear and announced the good news on the marketplace and broke down and died. Yes. So in his memoriam, they started, and for the first Olympic Games in Greece, they had a marathon run, and that kind of propagated in our times. So yeah.
Do you celebrate Thanksgiving?
Define celebration. I'm gonna have a turkey somewhere. I'm going for a 5K turkey run on Governor's Island. So
you're doing another run?
Yeah. That's what I do. I run into stats.
That's really fun.
No, I do fun things too. No, but yeah. So no, it's a I do a turkey trot, and yes, I'm gonna have turkey. But yeah.
Is this next run for another fundraiser? Or?
No. This is just a fun run with a friend. So yeah.
If you did the marathon, you get like 3 things. If you show your medal and like randomly so insomnia cookies or something, they'll make you a big cookie.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Do you have it on you?
I do not.
You can basically live in a year for free. It's honestly no worries. Especially when you run.
Okay, I keep that in mind. Gonna flash the medal whenever I get someone want a cookie.
You can walk around with it, like you know how they were doing the cakes.
Well, no, it was nice. It was the day after I actually went to the park. There was the New York Roadrunner Fair, and it was nice. And, like people congratulating you on the streets, so they know that you're anything. No, it was beautiful, really beautiful. Yeah. Okay. T-test. I get carried away talking about the marathon. But again, somebody of you is a runner, please absolutely.
You're like running, you're not 26.5.
Well, it's a stepwise process, right?
Would you ever do a triathlon?
No.
Why?
I'm a terrible swimmer. I'm a scuba diver, but I'm a terrible swimmer.
You scuba dive?
Yeah.
Whoa. Really cool. How do you even like, you just decide one day, yeah, I don't know where to scuba dive. That's it.
Okay, recording now. So we're talking today about the single sample t-test, and this is a wonderful test that actually allows us now to do hypothesis testing without needing the standard deviation population. As you remember, we need to test the difference of a sample, of the mean of a sample to the mean of a population. We do need the mean, the mu of the population, and we need the standard deviation from the population. And we use the standard deviation of the population to estimate the variability of the means, of the sample means of these randomly and independently drawn samples from the population to estimate this mean from the sample and the distribution of the sample means for the purpose of comparison to the population mean. This is hypothesis testing. We want to test this to see whether this sample and the distribution of that sample is different from the actual true population mean. And we will only accept a probability value that the sample we have drawn is from a different population, from a different part of the distribution as the population distribution with a p-value of 5%. Once this is less, we accept it as significantly different from the population mean. Otherwise, it's just drawn randomly due to pure chance from the normal population distribution. 5% is this p-value. So now what can be done? And this is essentially now where we start to think about the so-called t-distribution. And this comes back to an interesting conversation piece, because this t-distribution is basically the basis of all statistics. You will find the t-distribution in the context of so many statistical tests and so many statistical analyses that you will see throughout the time and your scientific careers moving forward. You will see t-scores in multiple regression. You will see it in ANOVA